Money Stop is back. It's your boys, Cole and Steven Cusimano, the Cusimano Bros. He's Cole, I'm Steven. And once again, this is your most important NASCAR betting stop of the day, presented by Kickin' the Tires. And Cole, coming off a big race at COTA, we've got our first multiple-time winner in the Cup Series in 2024. And to no surprise, it's William Byron. It's the third straight year where he is the first two-time winner. We've seen it time and time again. He just gets so hot coming out of the gates. And, you know, we talked about how much we're going to learn this week because we had been to super speedways. We had been to intermediates. We had been to the short tracks. We've been to a 1 mile. Now we've been to a road course. And William Byron, just as he did around this time last year, has really cemented himself as a championship favorite.
Absolutely. It really is insane to see how far William Byron's come in the short time he's been in the Cup Series. But just speaking on the next-gen era and how much he's developed, you know, Hendrick Motorsports, obviously they had Chase Elliott, who was a really hot up-and-coming guy in the Cup Series. Then they brought over Kyle Larson, who won his championship. And now you're seeing William Byron, who's kind of, I want to say, taken over that top dog role at HMS in, you know, his very young Cup career. And just seeing the trajectory he's on, how he's been able to improve his craft at all variety different tracks and just get better and better each year. And his rapport with Rudy Fugle has been very commendable as well. It's just been amazing to watch. And just speaking on this race from a general sense, I wasn't too enthralled by it. I think it was missing a little something. There were 11 lead changes, which were it was tied for the least amount at COTA since they've been going there in the Cup Series. And I think 5 of those times were for William Byron retaking the lead. So I think overall the product wasn't the best. I think I talked to Michael McDowell earlier in the season about how the new package would apply to the short tracks and then, of course, the road courses because he's such a road course specialist. And he didn't feel that it would really affect the racing too much from a passing sense because the passing has always been kind of tough there. But I think in this race, it seemed a bit more magnified. I think this was also borderline tied for the second least amount of green flag passes at COTA in those 4 starts they've been going there. So just was missing a little bit. William Byron, for all intents and purposes, dominated this race. And I think from a betting and DFS perspective, the biggest takeaway for me about COTA and road courses this year is going to be keep an eye on qualifying. We always preach it every single time we talk DFS, but I think seeing this first race and how it set the tone, if you got a car qualifying inside the top 10, that is as good as almost a lock to finish there because the passing was just so difficult and whatnot. They also have the stage breaks now, so there's not really much strategy again, just speaking on the green flag stops and whatnot. So that's going to be very important to note going forward for the road courses. But, you know, you can obviously take stock into what we say beforehand in the cases of, like we mentioned, AJ Allmendinger, Ross Chastain, Alex Bowman, Tyler Reddick, to name a few. So it wasn't a badly forecast weekend by any means. I just feel like the sleepers and the value picks kind of got shuffled back in the pack with either issues or just the struggles of navigating through the pack with this new package on the road courses. So overall, a little bit of a lackluster day, but I think it was a very important race in basically making a statement for William Byron in that 2014 that they're going to be here to play the entire way in 2024.
You hit it right on the head. I mean, regardless of the type of track, regardless of any external circumstances, that team is going to be a player, and in my opinion, Cole, a perennial championship contender. I think in this Gen 7 car, he has cemented himself as, like you said, the top dog, not even just at Hendrick, but again, we said it from early on last year. It's incredible to think about at his age, which is basically my age, that he has made himself this much of a favorite this early on as a guy that came from such an untraditional background. It's been such an impressive and unique story, and I think it's really going to change the way that iRacing and sim racing is looked at in terms of legitimate prospects in the Cup Series and in developmental racing. So it's been really good things for William Byron early on in the season. Running down the rest of this top 10, though, Cole, I got to say, we nailed it with a lot of our picks this past week. There were 3 that were not so good. Obviously, Michael McDowell ran into his troubles. He was one of our favorite picks of the week and wound up finishing, I think, second to last. So apologies if you picked Michael McDowell. but the logic was right. And then not the best of results for Kyle Larson and Chase Elliott. But outside of those three, the other 9 drivers we mentioned all had really good results. And I'm going to rattle off a lot of those names as we look down this top 10. Christopher Bell wound up finishing second. Ty Gibbs, another one of our favorites, finished third. Alex Bowman, one of our favorite sleepers, wound up fourth. So if you picked Bowman over McDowell, that was probably the best sleeper pick that we had in the episode, along with Tyler Reddick, who was a really good pick this week. AJ Allmendinger, another guy that we liked. Ross Chastain, who was my pick for the win as well, came very close to contending in that third stage. Chris Buescher 8th, Kyle Busch 9th, and Martin Truex Jr. 10th. So I guess, Cole, just final thoughts on COTA based on what we've seen there. Again, like you said, it wasn't the most competitive race in the sense that William Byron was the car and the team to beat from start to finish. But also in terms of predictability, I feel like we pretty much nailed this one. Outside of, like I said, those 3 drivers that we mentioned, that top 10 is almost entirely comprised of drivers that we expected to be up there, and hopefully you tailed us last week.
For sure. I mean, I know I was kind of getting down on us a little bit for our value picks and whatnot with mainly McDowell in mind, but it was a very well forecasted week, even with all the unknowns and the inability to pass on that track. But I think I said a lot of what I had to say on COTA, the race itself, but one thing I kind of want to segue into for the Richmond Take It to the Bank segment is broaden this analysis to like a 3-race stretch. So we had Phoenix, Bristol, and COTA. That's 3 tracks that are 2 short tracks and 1 road course, and one in Phoenix profiles very similarly to Richmond, obviously. A lot of comparisons made between those 2 tracks. So in those 3 races, Toyota has won 2 of them. Chevy won the last one, obviously, at William Byron. But in those 3 races, Toyota has combined for nearly 81% of the laps led in that time. That's 715 out of 880. So they've been the dominant manufacturer by far as of late. And I think they're going to be the ones that we're looking at as the favorites going into Richmond, as they always are at a place we herald a Toyota playground. So also wanted to kind of preview 4 drivers who are the only ones to finish top 10 in those 3 races. One that will not be mentioned on the show as far as the driver analysis is Ty Gibbs. But the other 3 drivers will be mentioned in this show, 2 of them being favorites, 1 being sleeper, and 2 of them being Toyotas, obviously, with their recent success. So without further ado, let's kick off our Take It to the Bank segment for Richmond.
Yes, sir. Let's take it to the bank as we get set for Richmond. We're going to get this all-important starting lineup Saturday, 11:15 a.m. Eastern Time. And as you mentioned, Cole, that's something we're going to be keeping very close eye on entering this race weekend at Richmond. Looking at our pre-qualifying odds per BetMGM, you've got a couple heavy favorites for the win, and it's no surprise. It's been the team that's pretty much been the class of the field the last few weeks, and that is Joe Gibbs Racing. Denny Hamlin is the favorite to win at plus 425. You kind of alluded to that a little bit before, along with Christopher Bell not far behind at plus 450. Martin Truex Jr., third best odds at plus 600. Then you've got the Hendrick Chevys. Kyle Larson at plus 1,000. William Byron at plus 1,100. So that's what Vegas thinks as their favorites. Cole, what do we got? Who do we got as our favorites this week?
Well, let's kick things off with the odds-on favorite in Denny Hamlin. He is the only driver with top 10s in all 4 next-gen starts at Richmond, with 3 top 5s, including a win and a runner-up in there as well in his most recent start, and nearly 120 laps led between all 4 of those next-gen starts, with a 6.8 average, and that amounts to the best in the series in that 4-race stretch. Only 2 top 10s with a 12.7 average this season, but he has led every single race so far for a combined 275 laps, which leads the series, actually. Very important numbers for DFS when taking that into account. And speaking on one of his home tracks throughout his entire career, 4 wins is second most in the series. He has the most laps led with over 2,200 and an 8.5 average finish. So Denny Hamlin, to put it simply, is one of the best at Richmond. But the guy I have my eye on is his teammate, Martin Truex Jr. at plus 600 for the race win, which is the third best odds to win it all. He is one of 4 drivers to place top 10 over the last 3 races in 2024, as alluded to. He's actually riding a 4-race top 10 streak this season, and only Gibbs has a longer streak with 5 this season so far. And his 8.8 average is also second best to Ty Gibbs through 6 races this season. He's also led over the last 5 races in 2024. Switching gears to Richmond now, 3 top 10s and 4 next-gen starts with the lowest finish of 11th. He has a 7.3 average, which is the third best, and 154 laps led, which is also third best over 3 starts. That's one thing I want to note because it's 154 is the third best overall in those 4 next-gen starts, but it's better in comparison to Joey Logano, who's ahead of him and led all of his 223 laps in one race, basically. So Truex, a lot of laps led over 3 starts out of 4 in the next-gen car, 3 top 10s as well, lowest finish of 11th, 7.3 average is really, really good. And that 11th place finish is actually his worst finish, going all the way back to fall of 2018. So 10 starts at Richmond, and all 3 of his wins have come in that time with 7 total top 5s as well in that 10-race stretch. So to put it simply, Martin Truex Jr. has been one of the best cars the entire season, and I look for this to be a really, really strong race for that 19 team.
I'm a huge fan of both of those picks. In general this week, I am all in on the Joe Gibbs Racing Toyotas, and on that note, I got to move on to our next favorite, which is the driver that is just behind Denny Hamlin in odds and the runner-up from last week. That is Christopher Bell, who's plus 450 for the win per BetMGM. And he is one of 4 drivers with top 10s over the last 3 races this season. So he's been very consistent recently. Over that span, a 4.3 average finish is the best in the series, if you can believe it. All this talk about Ty Gibbs last week. Meanwhile, Christopher Bell has really cemented himself as really the driver to beat at Joe Gibbs Racing. But we've seen the win from Denny Hamlin. You mentioned how he's got a great shot this week. I just love Christopher Bell. He's got the win at Phoenix, the runner-up at COTA. It just feels like everything is leading up to a Christopher Bell win at some point in the near future. And why not at this Joe Gibbs Racing playground that is Richmond Raceway? 3 top 10s in his last 4 starts at Richmond with a best finish of 2nd in that span. He got 20th in the last race there, which in my opinion, I'm just going to call a little bit of a fluke. But over that 4-race stretch at Richmond, an 8th place average finish. That's the 4th best among active drivers. So you've got the success at Richmond. You've got the Joe Gibbs Racing kind of ally on his side in the sense that they've been really strong at this track the last few years, and the recency factor that he has been one of the hottest drivers in the sport entering this race. Big fan of those 3. And it's kind of crazy to think the fact that we've, again, did all this talking about Ty Gibbs, and you could argue he's been the best Joe Gibbs Racing Toyota this year. He's the only one that's not included in our favorites category this week, but we're still high on him too. It's just, you can't go all 4 Joe Gibbs Racing Toyotas as our 4 favorites this week. So if we got to pick one other, it is none other than the eclectic William Byron, who showed off the win at the Super Speedway, showed off the win at the road course. I think he can most certainly show off that he's also a driver to beat at these short tracks. We saw how strong he looked at Phoenix, coming off that 2nd win of the season. But it's been an interesting kind of mixed bag of results for Willie B at Richmond since the next-gen era, because in his first start there, finished 3rd with the new car, and that's his best finish at Richmond in this next-gen car era. Last year, failed to finish above 21st in both of those starts, which again to me is a little fluky compared to the rest of his results last year. But in the spring races, both last year and the year prior, he led over 100 laps in both of them for a total of 239 combined laps, which is the most in the series in the next-gen era. So he's led a ton of laps here at Richmond in the next-gen car era. Doesn't necessarily have the results to show for it, but he does have the results, obviously, to show for this season. And I think that it's just a matter of time before that 2014 puts it together at this track. And what better week than this week, coming off the big win at COTA. So I'm a really big fan of that favorites category, Cole. The Joe Gibbs Toyotas. If you got to pick a Hendrick Chevy, of course it's William Byron. So really well-rounded there. We have a very similar mindset to Vegas in that regard. The only one in Vegas's top 5 that we did not mention was Kyle Larson. And on that note, Cole, let's kick it down to our sleepers category. These blue ovals, man. The Fords still have not been to victory lane. That's certainly a developing storyline entering this week at Richmond. And this is going to be a tier of drivers that we think has a chance to get it done for that Ford Mustang camp.
Right. And I've already mentioned Ty Gibbs, Christopher Bell, and Martin Truex Jr. as the 3 drivers in the Toyota camp who finished top 10 over the last 3 races in 2024. The other driver I was alluding to was none other than Chris Buescher, valued at plus 1,200 for the Raceman, which is the 2nd best per BetMGM. He is the only Ford to finish top 10 over the last 3 races. That amounts to a 5.7 average in that span, which is the 3rd best of those 4 drivers. He also leads the Blue Ovals in top 10s this season with 4. So he's been really, really good for that Ford camp. That 3-race stretch does include a runner-up at Phoenix, which again, as mentioned, is a very similar track to Richmond, so taking a lot of stock into that. He also, keep in mind, he won the most recent race at Richmond. On top of that, he also has a third-place finish back in the fall 2022 race. So I think it's funny, you kind of mentioned there in the William Byron analysis, the results aren't quite there for the 24 team, but William Byron has had a lot of success in the spring races by leading over 100 laps in both of those in the next-gen car. Well, it's kind of the opposite for Chris Buescher. So he has the win, obviously, back in 2023 in the fall race. And he also finished third in the fall 2022 race. So looking at the spring races now, he has a best finish of 15th in the next-gen car. So a little bit of a day and night opposition there for William Byron and Chris Buescher. But nonetheless, I think that Chris Buescher is going to be a great pick for this week, as is his teammate, Brad Keselowski, who's plus 1,400 for the race win, and that is the 9th best odds per BetMGM for the race win. Keep in mind, this was just a great race in general all around for RFK Racing. Buescher might have stolen the show, but Brad K led a race-high 102 laps in this race and finished 6th, which was his best next-gen result at Richmond. And speaking on his next-gen results at Richmond, 2 top 10s and no finish worse than 15th for an 11th place average at this track. So on top of that, Brad K, this has been one of his best tracks throughout his entire career. 2 wins, including one of his last as in the Cup Series, almost 1,300 laps led, and a 15th place finish is his worst there going back to 2015. That's a 16-race stretch where he's finished better than 15th, including those 2 wins. So I think you look at the guys I mentioned before, Gibbs, Truex, Buescher, and Bell, top 10s over the last 3 starts. Keselowski is one of 3 drivers with top 5s in 2 of those starts, and that includes a season best finish of 3rd at Bristol. So I look for both RFK Ford to be really, really strong here at Richmond.
I mean, you said it about Brad, the fact that this track has stood the test of time in his career, regardless of how early in the career, what team he's been with. Another driver you can say the same about is another former champion in Kyle Busch. It doesn't matter where he's been, what year it's been, any of the circumstances. Richmond has always been one of Kyle Busch's top tracks, if not his top track. Plus 2,000 for the win. That's the 12th highest odds because he's had an inconsistent season. He's coming off only his second top 10 of 2024, but I don't necessarily think that that's indicative of how well that team has run. They've had really good speed at certain times this year. And again, coming to a bread and butter track, he has top 10s in 3 of 4 next-gen car starts at Richmond, as well as the overall history. Best finish of 3rd came in the most recent race there, which was in the fall for an 8.8 average finish in this next-gen car era for Kyle Busch. And, that's the more recent history, which is good, but the career-long history for Kyle Busch at this track is great. He is the best of the best with 6 wins, and his 7.1 average finish at Richmond is not only the best among active drivers, that is through 36 starts at this track. So that tells you, that's a very telling stat. The fact that he has the most laps logged at this track, most laps led at over 1,500, and even including that, with all the opportunity for a bad finish to weigh that number down, he's got a 7.1 average finish, the best in the garage at this track, with 6 wins. So I think for Kyle Busch, you look at this season as a disappointment so far, again, coming off just the second top 10. But again, one of those drivers where if you've watched every race this year, you understand that the results have not been indicative of where that team is at and how fast they've been. And I think that he comes out to a track that's always been in his wheelhouse his entire career. You know they're motivated to put a really good result on the board coming out of Richmond this week. But I do want to also mention, Cole, I mentioned how this sleepers category was going to be heavy on Fords. And I think that there is maybe a little bit of urgency settling in that camp to try and get something going as far as a win in 2024. And it seems like the guy that always gets it done is Joey Logano. Plus 2,500 for the race win. That's 14th highest odds. And he's had a good career at Richmond too. I just feel that when you think of the Ford camp, Joey Logano is the guy that when the going gets tough, he's got to be the one that, again, the grizzled veteran, the former champion, that's got to get the monkey off their back. He's got a 3-race top 10 streak at Richmond, 4th most recently there in the fall, and over 200 laps led at the start of this streak of 3-race top 10s, going back to the fall of 2022. So he had over 200 laps led there, And at Richmond overall, in Joey's career, 2 wins, a 10th place average. That is the 4th best, and it's over 29 starts. So a very similar sample size to what we have with Kyle Busch, except the 4th best odds. So a really good track to Joey his entire career. I think that you could certainly vie for the fact that maybe he should have more than 2 wins at Richmond in his career. But I am, with all of that being said, as much as I like this track for Joey and his ability here, I'm tempering expectations only because he's coming off the 11th place finish at COTA, which we weren't expecting much out of him there anyway. But regardless, that was his 2nd best finish of the season. He had a 9th place at Vegas, which was his only top 10 so far this year. So I think I'm definitely tempering expectations, but it's still Joey Logano at Richmond. And again, I think that there's something to be said for that sense of urgency that may be settling in with the Ford camp. So I like Joey Logano. I really like Kyle Busch. And I'm a big fan of those 2 RFK Fords that you mentioned as well for sleepers this week. In addition to sleepers, there's certainly some value to be had, as there is every single week here on the Money Stop. And I'm going to kick this one off, Cole, because we have gone far too long on this episode not talking enough about Alex Bowman. I know we mentioned the top 5 finish at COTA off the cuff there, but Alex Bowman is still being a little bit disrespected by the odds makers. Plus 5,000 for the win is the 16th driver in the odds, along with Brad Keselowski and Ross Chastain. He is one of 3 drivers to place top 10 in 2 of the last 3 races this season. So we said it, and I think it was our preseason episode. It might have even been one of our Daytona or Phoenix episodes. Can't remember. Alex Bowman, for whatever reason, always unloads hot every season, no matter what the circumstances are. He wins races early in the year. He places top 5 in the early season every year. And that has remained to be the case. He's got back-to-back 4th place finishes entering this week, tied with Ty Gibbs, Christopher Bell, and Ryan Blaney for the most top 5s this season with 3. So really quietly, Alex Bowman's put together a solid season, and he is a former winner at Richmond from 2021, which of course was early in the season. In this next-gen car era at Richmond, he's got 2 8th place finishes in the spring race and an 18th and 20th place finish in the fall races. So in the next-gen side of things, that's a 13.5 average finish. So similarly to what I mentioned with Joey Logano, tempering expectations a little bit. However, I'm taking a lot of stock in the fact that Alex Bowman is the spring king. It just seems that when we get to this point in the season, when we unload, come out of speed weeks, that 48 team has a knack for going fast and winning races. So he is certainly on my radar, especially at plus 5,000 odds. I mean, that's why he's a value pick and not necessarily a sleeper this week. Adding to that, Cole, I want to discuss Josh Berry for a moment. Really good value to be had here because in his only Cup Series start at Richmond, which was in a fill-in opportunity last year, he finished runner-up with 10 laps led, and that is very telling considering, again, stepping into a car and a team that you're unfamiliar with. Now you come into this year where he's had a few races under his belt with this Stewart-Haas Racing number 4 team. And for Josh Berry, thinking about his Xfinity career at Richmond, that's 3 top 10s, including a 3rd place finish with laps led at Richmond. And in 2024, it's been a tough season, no way around it for Josh Berry. 26th at Phoenix after crashing in practice and starting from the rear with the backup. His season best finish this year was actually a 12th place finish at Bristol, but he did lead laps there, and he was one of the better cars that was not in the Joe Gibbs Racing stable at Bristol in that race. So we've seen a little bit of the signs, a little bit of the glimpses out of Josh Berry in 2024. But again, I'm basing this value pick largely on the fact that he had a really strong performance at Richmond in 2023 as a fill-in opportunity. And again, coming off of that success in the Xfinity Series as well, Richmond, I think that Josh Berry is certainly a driver I've got my eye on this week.
Both drivers I feel are very good and underrated picks going into Richmond. I also love the nickname dubbing Alex Bowman the Spring King. That is very fitting. 2 guys I'm looking at. Oh, and by the way, full transparency, we are recording on Tuesday this week. We typically record on Thursday, and the prices for DFS do not drop until usually either Wednesday night or Thursday. So that's why you're not getting the prices here, but we'll go into a little bit more DFS analysis.
Real quick too, Cole. I did omit mentioning Josh Berry's odds. He's plus 6,500 for the race win. That's why he's a value. I couldn't. You reminded me with the DFS prices, but Josh Berry a value at plus 6,500.
Right, and that's how I went about this value picks category for this show, was going based off the odds, because you really can't know who's a value for sure without seeing the prices for DFS, but this seemed like the best option. So with that, I'll kick things off here with one of the better Fords in 2024 in Chase Briscoe, who finished 11th and 12th at Richmond last year, actually, and 11th place is actually his career best at Richmond, which he's done twice, both in the next-gen era at Richmond. He's got a solid 14.3 average finish in the next-gen era, with a minimal contrast to his 15.8 average through 6 starts in the Cup Series at Richmond, which is a very even-keeled and safe bet, I would say. Also finished a season-best 9th at Phoenix earlier 3 weeks ago. Again, a very similar track to Richmond, so taking a lot of stock into that. And he's also riding back-to-back 13th-place finishes since that 9th-place finish, so got some positive momentum on his side. Not the flashiest in the garage, but I think among the Ford drivers, he's been one of the more consistent and flashier drivers in that camp. So do like Chase Briscoe quite a bit this weekend as well. And then one guy I want to pick on here, he has had just an abysmal year plus in the Cup Series, and that trend has followed into 2024, unfortunately, for one Austin Dillon, whose best finish this season is 16th through 6 races. And it's gotten to the point where you're just sitting around wondering, when is this black cloud going to just move over from this 3 team? Because it's just been nonstop, one thing after another. DNFs, crashes, pit road troubles, you name it. Austin Dillon and that 3 team have gone through it for over a season now. And it's been really troubling and disappointing to see, especially with Kyle Busch coming over to RCR. He really thought that he'd get things righted there with a 2-time champion jumping on board. But there's been one commonality throughout his entire career, and that's kind of been consistent success at Richmond. And speaking on that, he has 2 top 10s in 4 next-gen starts there, with his best finish of 9th coming in the most recent race. And he has a 15th place average in that 4-race stretch, which is really respectable, especially for someone who's struggled mightily over the last 2 years. But over his last 7 starts at Richmond, he has 4 top 10s, so a really good sample size there. That includes a career-best 4th-place finish in that 7-race stretch and a 12.1 average as well in that time. So definitely been one of his better tracks for sure. And then even overall, through 19 starts, 16.3 average, which is more than respectable for a really, really good sample size. So I think Austin Dillon, this is a guy where you have to really, really temper expectations, because the results have not been there the last 2 years, basically. And you're kind of putting your faith in the history that's taken place for this driver at this track. And their history does show that he's been pretty solid. I mean, 12.1 average in over 7 races, 15th-place average over 4 races in the next-gen car, and then 16.3 over all of his 19 starts. That's really, really solid for someone who struggled, honestly, throughout his entire career in Cup. So he's someone that I would look at as a true value for this week.
And he's plus 10,000 for the win. I don't think he's going to win the race, but for these value picks, these are very deep dives, and you're not necessarily looking for a winner, but at plus 350 for Austin Dillon to finish in the top 10, based on what you just said, can I see that happening? Yeah, I might be able to. I'm definitely more of a see it to believe it kind of guy. I am, again, obviously you're tempering expectations for all the reasons you mentioned with Austin Dillon, but relative to the rest of his career, Richmond has been a kind track to Austin Dillon, and it certainly leads you to believe that this could be the week where they come out of this funk that they've been in to start the 2024 season. And you could say the same about some of the other drivers we mentioned. You're not expecting a win out of Josh Berry or Chase Briscoe per se, but their top 10 odds are really not out of the question, considering what we just mentioned. So that's our 12 drivers. We've got our 4 favorites. We've got our 4 sleepers. We've got our 4 value picks. Let's each pick a couple, one from each tier, Cole, as we always do. Get this 12 down to a field of 6. I'm going with the Killer Bees this week. Out of the favorites category, I will take Christopher Bell. Out of the sleepers, I will take Kyle Busch. And out of the values, I will take Alex Bowman.
Awesome set of drivers there. I will go Martin Truex Jr. for my favorite, Chris Buescher as my sleeper, and then Chase Briscoe as my value pick.
Well, we've got 5 drivers out of our 6 that last name starts with B. So I don't know if there's any trivial bets out there that the driver who wins last name starts with B, but that might be a pretty solid prop bet if they have it anywhere on any random sports book. But Cole, let's talk big money bets here. And we've got a top 10 odds to look at. We've got some top 5 odds to look at. We don't have daily fantasy prices or head-to-head matchups like you mentioned, but we'll get into that in a second as to how we're going to handle that this week with a little bit of an earlier recording date. But let's look at our favorite big money bets of the week. I'm going to start there with Alex Bowman, plus 150 to be in the top 10. Not the worst that I've seen this week. I don't know if I'm ready to call it a big money bet, but I see some of the other ones. I see William Byron at plus 140 to be in the top 5. I see Chris Buescher at that same value to be in the top 5. That's where I think the value is this week as far as big money bets go. I think that you look at the top 5 odds for some of our favorites this week, and I think that there's definitely some value to be had there for big money bets.
For sure. I feel like there's not a whole lot out there that I'm really gravitating towards, mainly because the ones I look at are the ones that are either at even or above even. And, I mean, I feel really good about Truex. His top 5 odds are minus 135. I guess you can call that a big money bet if you really wanted to. But just speaking on some other names, I like Chris Buescher, top 5, plus 140. And the one that I'm really high on is probably Kyle Busch to finish top 5 at plus 190. You mentioned it in your analysis. The results have not really been there for this team. The speed definitely has. Scored a second top 10 of the season this past week at COTA. And we didn't mention it at all, but he was fired up following that finish. I mean, he got all up in Christopher Bell's face, obviously spun him out there late in the race, and was not happy. So I think a fired up Kyle Busch is a very dangerous one for the rest of the field. And he's finished top 10 here 3 times in this next-gen car out of 4 starts. Got the most wins here at this track, best average finish, so why not? I think Kyle Busch finished top 5 is a pretty solid one, in my opinion.
While we're at this, Cole, we talked about top 5 bets. We talked about top 10 bets. I think we're both on the same page that this race is going to be won by Joe Gibbs Toyota. I would be surprised if that's not the case. And the winning manufacturer to be a Toyota is minus 120. I think that's a really good big money bet because, again, you've got Denny Hamlin, Ty Gibbs, Martin Truex Jr., and Christopher Bell in your corner. And you can get that at similar odds to any one of those drivers finishing in the top 5, essentially. The next step down from there would be a Chevy to win at plus 250, and you're looking at guys, again, like William Byron, Kyle Larson, and then Fords are plus 300. So I really do like that Toyota at minus 120 to be the winning manufacturer. It's basically a Joe Gibbs versus the field prop bet, and that's one that I'm not a big fan of it most weeks, but I am definitely a fan of it as a big money bet this week. Now, Cole, you alluded to the fact that we're recording this episode a little bit early this week. We like to go with Thursdays because we've got all the daily fantasy prop bets budgets out. We've got all the different prop bets, the head-to-heads, all that good stuff. Unable to get on the same schedule late in the week this week. I think this is kind of a blessing in disguise because it kind of gives us a chance to break down the data in a way that we typically don't. A lot of times we'll just look at the daily fantasy prices, build a lineup, give you value in that regard, which in itself is a good thing. But we're 6 races into the season now. We've talked a lot about the fact that we've been to every kind of track, and that's a pretty decent sample size to work with. I mean, we're a 6th the way through the year, which sounds like a little, but it also kind of sounds like a lot. So the way we're going to handle it this week is you've put together a lot of really insightful numbers that we can work with as far as trends, drivers that have overexceeded their value in daily fantasy and in prop bets to this point in the year, drivers that have been really good bargains, average points, stuff like that when it comes to daily fantasy. You've been very good about keeping those kinds of numbers this year, and I think this week proposes an extremely good opportunity to bring those numbers to the forefront. And maybe we can make this kind of like a mid-season update. We can do this every 4 or 5 weeks and kind of just run through the trends that we're noticing with these types of things, because it's important to be aware of that in addition to the things that we already discussed. So I'm going to call it a blessing in disguise, and you've got some really insightful numbers to share with us here as far as the trends go.
Yeah, there were some pretty surprising things I found out upon crunching all these numbers, which, by the way, I had a blast doing this. I love doing all the number stuff and figuring out all the data behind this. But, I really wanted to crack down on being more, concise with our numbers and deliberate with what we do. So that ultimately amounted to tallying up every single points total from all the races and every single driver this season. And what I have here are the top 5 and bottom 5 drivers in average points per race. I'm going to kick this off here with the number 1 driver in that regard in Ty Gibbs, who is averaging 55.3 points per race From there, you've got Martin Truex Jr., Denny Hamlin, Ross Chastain, and Ryan Blaney rounding up the top 5. Not a whole lot of surprises there. I mean, we mentioned how great Ty Gibbs, Truex have been in regards to their average finish and their place in the standing at this point right now. Denny Hamlin's obviously a winner this season. Ross Chastain has been one of the more consistent drivers the entire year, and Ryan Blaney can be considered the same as well. Looking at the bottom 5 drivers, though, there is a pretty interesting drivers here to note. The least points per race, which I think it won't be a surprise because this driver has been pretty awful since entering the Cup Series ranks. Harrison Burton, averaging 6.9 points per race. So you're looking at the top scoring driver on a weekly basis in Ty Gibbs at 55.3, lowest scoring at Harrison Burton, 6.9. So pretty decent 50-point swing there. The second least points so far this season, Austin Cindric. That's a pretty surprising one to me, just seeing how fast they were to start the year off. Then you've got Zane Smith, maybe not as big a surprise being his rookie season, driving for Spire. Then we've got 2 drivers who've been really, really fast on Saturdays in qualifying and practice in Michael McDowell. He is our 4th least points scored this year, and then 5th least, we've got 2-time champ Joey Logano. And that one, I feel, obviously, it's a huge, huge name, but at the same time, we mentioned it during you mentioned it during your analysis. He only has 1 top 10 this year. Second best finish came last week in 11th place. So it's been a really tough go for that 22 team. But I think this is just further validation that they got some work to do, and hopefully that righting the ship begins with Richmond. But moving on here, I got a few more different things I want to take note of for DFS. Drivers with no negative points in a single race or 0 points in a single race. There were 15 drivers. I'm not going to list them all, but the ones I want to make mention of were John Hunter Nemechek, Alex Bowman, Ryan Preece, Justin Haley, and Chris Buescher. Those are 5 drivers that are typically in the, I would say, high 7,000s or maybe low 8,000s to the $6,000 range in DFS. So for all intents and purposes, those are usually value picks. And those are 5 names, with the exception of maybe Chris Buescher, that you're not really thinking of on a weekly basis. So if you're in a pinch and you're struggling to think of someone who either hasn't been good or someone that has not been good in the 2024 season so far, or not been great historically or in the next-gen car, those are 5 guys you can look at as kind of like a fallback option for DFS. And just speaking on those 5 drivers mentioned, Alex Bowman averaged the most points at 39.9 per race, and Justin Haley averaged the least of those at 27.9. So that 10-point swing there, but right in the middle of that 55.3 and 6.9 from Gibbs and Burton. But I think those are pretty good numbers, and hopefully it's insightful stuff that'll set you up for success for DFS.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, we should definitely tweet these out or something just so that they're in writing and a little bit easier to kind of read off. But that's definitely interesting to me to hear some of those names. Like if you're at the end of your daily fantasy budget, you need a 6th driver and you're between, say, a Harrison Burton and a John Hunter Nemechek, that kind of breaks the tie for me, just in sense of the what he's averaged this year and the value that a guy like John Hunter Nemechek or a Justin Haley or an Alex Bowman has been able to bring. And my other big takeaway from that data set is it just kind of further proves our point of how important it is to denote qualifying before you lock in your DFS bet, because you mentioned it on Saturdays. How fast have Michael McDowell and Joey Logano been? Feels like they started on the front row almost every week, but if you're not going to finish in the top 10, you're going to lose a ton of place differential points, regardless of how many fast laps you have, how many laps you lead, regardless of your finishing position. I guess not necessarily regardless of that, but you get what I'm trying to say here. You know, we talk about all these numbers every week before qualifying. We always make mention of the fact that it's important to take into consideration the potential of place differential points and where drivers are starting with what we say. And I think those numbers are perfect evidence with those 4th and 5th lowest scoring drivers on points per race average of Michael McDowell and Joey Logano. It's a very good sample size to think about that. So I'm glad we had this opportunity here to go through some of those numbers, Cole, because again, it's easy to go from track to track, go to Phoenix, to Vegas, to Richmond, to Coda, wherever we're going, and just kind of let bygones be bygones, but you kind of get a chance to like look at what the patterns are, look at what the trends are, and take that into consideration going into this next quarter, so to speak, of the season. So appreciate all the hard work on those numbers. I think that was definitely something to keep an eye on going into these next few weeks of the season. And we'll try to tweet these out for you guys as well.
Yeah, for sure. I will definitely get on that. And I also wanted to mention that in regards to these numbers, this was just averaging out the 6 races we've had so far. But as we get to like the halfway point, I'm going to definitely get a more, concise notebook written down with data, and we'll do it by track. We can do it by like the last 5 races. So we'll make this thing really big and really telling for DFS going forward. But overall, I think I was pleased with the research I found.
Interesting stuff, Cole. Again, recording this earlier in the week, this is where we would typically go through our head-to-head driver bets, our DFS lineup recommendation, but I think this was a very good substitute for that this week. So before we drop the jack, though, Cole, we've got some unfinished business. We've got to go with our race winners and sleeper picks officially this week. Just to recap what we went with last week, you had Chase Elliott as your favorite to win, Alex Bowman as your sleeper, and Alex Bowman was a really good pick. I had Ross Chastain, who was a great contender as well, so we were on the money with a couple of those picks there. You went first last week, though, so I'm going to get the first pick at a race winner because we cannot pick the same driver. So this week, Cole, I'm going to go with Christopher Bell. I know we saw our first 2-time winner this season in William Byron. I think the very next week here at Richmond, we're going to get our second 2-race winner, and that is going to be Christopher Bell. I just feel like these two drivers have had such a similar trajectory to their careers, right down to the fact that they were both in the Championship 4 last year and both came up short. I feel like it's a kind of a situation where whatever you can do, I can do better, regardless of if they look at it like that or not. That's kind of the way I see it. I think that Christopher Bell, again, won at Phoenix. We're taking a lot of stock into that. And I think he's going to Joe Gibbs Racing Toyota is going to win at Richmond. And if I had to pick one of the 4, I'm going with Christopher Bell.
That's a great call there. I actually agree with you, definitely, in the sense of comparing Byron and Bell for this season and just looking ahead. I'm going to go and ride the hot hand for my sleeper and go with Alex Bowman once again, riding those back-to-back 4th-place finishes, going to a place where he's won before, and you mentioned him. You called him the Spring King. I think that's going to be a driver to watch for sure for a top 5 once again at this track. And you mentioned this being a race won by a Joe Gibbs Toyota. I 1000% agree, and I'm so happy you did not pick my driver because I have my mind made up for quite a bit now, and I love MTJ for the win this week. Love what I've seen from this team the entire season. I think he's been overshadowed by Denny getting the win, Ty Gibbs finishing what feels like top 5 every single week, Christopher Bell obviously getting the win and being dominant, but Martin Truex Jr. and that 19 team have been extremely strong all year long. That's made evident by their second best average finish through 6 races this season. And I think this is going to be a race that's, I won't even call it, a competition. I think it's going to be completely dominated by Martin Truex Jr. We always see that every single time he wins a race, and I think we're going to see him lead almost every single lap once again here in this spring Richmond race.
Wouldn't surprise me. I mean, you said it right there. It feels like whenever Martin Truex Jr. wins a race, it's just a complete ass whooping. It's never like he steals the win. It's never like last restart of the race, he started third and kind of makes things happen. It's always an ass whooping. And for the Joe Gibbs Racing Toyotas, I just feel like this Richmond track has always been so predictable. We say it every year. This is our 4th season doing this podcast. We say it every year. The Toyotas own this track, and this is a race that is promptly named. I'm not even joking. This is actually what the race is called, the Toyota Owners 400 at Richmond this week. That's going to be this upcoming Sunday, Easter Sunday, 7 o'clock Eastern time. So it's going to be an Easter night race, which should be a very interesting wrinkle. We'll see what the ratings look like for that. But it is the aptly named Toyota Owners 400 this upcoming Easter Sunday night at 7 o'clock Eastern time. So Cole, appreciate all the hard work, as always, going into this episode. And again, I think this will be a good week to follow us on social media at _MoneyStop because, again, recording the episode a little earlier this week than we usually do, Tuesday versus Thursday. There's going to be some more trends and updates that we have by the minute and by the day that'll be important to mention, as well as some of the stats that you brought up before, Cole, that we discussed in kind of our sixth of the way through the season State of the Union address here on the Money Stop. But again, that's at the _Money Stop. He is at Cole_Cusimano_ on social media, always tweeting out great NASCAR information. And I'm at Steven _Cusimano on Twitter and X and everywhere else as well. So, Cole, Richmond, I'll be honest, as we get into our final thoughts here, pennies for thought, this has always been like near the bottom tier of like my favorite tracks. I don't know if it's just because of the racing we've seen here. I know you visited this track and you really liked it a lot when you covered the race there. I think it was last year. But just from like an audience fan viewership standpoint, Richmond's a race that I'm going to be honest, I've never looked forward to this race.
I'm on the same side as you, unfortunately. And that's nothing against Richmond. Like, going there like in person, I thought it was a really nice facility. It had a really, really old school feel, and I could see why it's on the circuit, obviously. Maybe not 2 times, and that's why it's not in there anymore 2 times. But, I think watching it home, it's it's never been a great product. I feel like, again, it's always dominated by the Toyotas or always dominated by one car, it feels like. So it's just never really been one that I've enjoyed watching just because there's not a whole lot of parity, a lot of green flag racing. It's really hard to pass there. It's kind of like what people call Phoenix, which I understand all those negative notions and whatnot, but this is kind of like that on a magnified scale, in my opinion. So I look forward to every single race, but Richmond a little bit less, I'd say.
Agreed. I mean, it's like you said it best right there. I look forward to every race. I'm excited about every race weekend, but there's just certain tracks you love. Like, I always love Martinsville, always love Phoenix, always love, obviously, places like Talladega. I was always a big fan of Homestead. Richmond was just a track that when I see we're going there, don't get as excited. That's just on a personal note. But like you said, nothing against the track. I think it's really exciting to look forward to. And, the other thing with this is the fact you mentioned the similarities to Phoenix in that regard. We had a really competitive race this year at Phoenix, and I think they're definitely onto something with this short track package, especially at the 1 mile ovals. And that certainly gives us something to look forward to entering this week at Richmond. And listen, talk about the non-competitiveness, the predictability. That leaves a lot of money to be made for all you listeners out there. So hope you listened up. This is for the Toyota Owners 400 at Richmond this upcoming Sunday, March 31st, Easter Sunday, 7 o'clock Eastern Time. We're going to drop the jack on this, your most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. Thank you all so much for tuning in with us. Presented by Kicking the Tires. This has been the Money Stop. He's Cole Cusimano. I'm Steven Cusimano, and we'll see you next time.